Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded keynote session held in collaboration with the University of Edinburgh Entrepreneurship Society and the History of Art Society at the University of Edinburgh. This keynote will feature Lucy Brown, the Head of Scotland and Deputy Director for Sotheby's, one of the world's largest brokers of fine and decorative art, jewellery, real estate and collectables. She studied English and French literature at the University of York before pursuing a law degree. The original event was hosted on Tuesday, the 29th of September 2020. Unfortunately, the first part of the interview is cut off due to technical difficulties. However, the rest of the interview should be fine, so please excuse this. We hope that you enjoy this session.
End up in a career which has very little to do with my degree, but I've done lots of different careers on the way there. So one of the things I kind of was asked to think about to give you some insight is what the motivation was for my original degree. And it was a long time ago. So 1994, I started my first degree. And the reason I chose English and French literature, was just because that was my favorite subject. And for me, that was the only reason to choose it, is that it was my favorite subject. And everyone said to me, study something that you love, don't worry about getting a job, blah, blah, blah. I was worried about getting a job. But I chose it. It was great. I completely loved it. In my head, aged 18 or 19, I was going to study English literature. And then I was going to be either a publisher or an author. And I was going to live in Bloomsbury, and I was going to be surrounded by cats and cushions, and it was all going to be marvelous. And then I started the degree, and every single person on my degree had exactly the same idea. They all wanted to work in publishing or be an author. And I just thought, gee, I don't know if this is actually for me. I maybe want to do something different. And I did some arts-based jobs for a while. So not visual arts. I started out working in festivals, so performing arts. And I also was a producer for a theatre company. Something we started at university and carried on as and we toured theatres and things like that. So it was quite interesting going from university into the arts world and thinking, so this is where I'm going to have my life. I'm going to work in the arts, festivals, theatres. It was all good fun. And after a while, I felt, God, I was always really academic, and none of that is helping me here. And the possibilities of progressing in the arts are really minimal. And I want to get a house, and I want to get, I want to be able to spend some money. It was that practical, it was that pragmatic. I thought, I'm academic and I'm stuck in jobs now which pay me virtually nothing with no chance of going anywhere, and I've worked really hard. And I used to love performing, public speaking, and someone said to me, have you thought about being a barrister? And I hadn't, and I don't think they even offered law at my university, so I had no experience of this at all. But I thought, I'd love that. I could wear a wig, I could argue in public, this would be amazing. And that's as much thought as I gave it. And then the stumbling block, which hits us all, is I realized law school was going to cost me thousands and thousands of pounds. There was no funding. I'd have to pay to go to law school. You couldn't get a student loan to cover it. It was an expensive thing. So I thought the only way I can do this is if someone sponsors me to do it. And I found out that there are big corporate law firms in London who would sponsor me. They would pay my law school fees. They would pay for me to live for a year while I was studying. And I thought, great, this is it. If I can do that, I can study law. And I applied knowing very little about the law alphabetically. So I started with firms beginning with A, and then I went on to firms beginning with B. And I was lucky to get an interview and then be offered a job with one of the first ones I applied to, which was Allen and Overy, which for law students is one of the big sort of magic circle firms. And they gave me the job knowing I'd not studied any law. They had a special interview process for people who had not studied law. And I took the job and I started my legal training down at the College of Law in London. And I absolutely loved it. The first year was intense study. It was the CPE, as it was called then. It was very intense study. We studied every area of law, and I loved criminal law. And I thought, this is great. This is amazing. At criminal law, I'm going to be a barrister. But a training contract with a corporate law firm does not entitle you to study criminal law or be a barrister. So my second year was all about corporate finance and tax law and accountancy. And for somebody with an arts background and an arts bias, it was absolutely death and awful. But I couldn't really stop because they were paying for me to study, and they were giving me a job at the end of it. So I finished and I joined Allen and Overy. And to be honest, I had 2 years of working incredibly hard. And I didn't like it. I knew on day one it was not the right job for me. But I thought I'll finish my 2 years. And looking back now with the benefit of hindsight, those 2 years was some of the most incredible training for me to get other positions, even within the arts, because what they really teach you by watching other people, to be honest, is they teach you how to engage with clients, with people in a professional context and in an advisory context, when it's all about who you are and whether people want to listen to you or trust you. And that is just as useful in a big city meeting as it is when you're trying to scrabble around to get funding in an arts organization, or I worked in retail a lot, and it's just as useful there. So I would say that was my kind of brief, well, it wasn't brief, 2 years of corporate law. And at the end of it, I decided that I would kind of go back a bit and do some employment law, which seemed to me a bit less corporate. And I would defend people and turn up in court, which is what I'd always wanted to do, and it was great fun. But law was never the right fit. I loved the study. It fulfilled me academically, but as a career, it for me, it was filled with people who are really, really good at worrying. And if you are a stickler for detail, and if you are good at worrying and good at thinking what the worst possible outcome could be and planning for that and making sure, you know, you're the person that's thought, actually, what if this goes wrong? Amazing. These are the lawyers I would want to work for me. And I am not like that, and I wasn't like that, and my approach was always, I'm sure it'll be fine, and that is not it's not a satisfying career for someone who has that mindset. So I eventually got the courage to leave, and I say courage because law is an incredibly well paid and well respected job. And for my family, for example, no one in our family had ever been a lawyer or had a profession. So they were super proud. My parents would tell everyone they met that their daughter was a lawyer. You know, I mean, there was a lot that made it very exciting and fun. The money, the kind of feeling that you were in a safe job, you were learning something. It was all very good. But when I left, the reason I managed to leave, I wanted to go back in the arts, but that was really tricky. And I found what was tricky was that arts organizations were not interested at that stage in my legal training. They thought, the feedback I got was that they thought I would not be fulfilled working in the arts, because why would I do that when I've got a profession and legal training, which, you know, took years, which it did. And I found it really difficult to convince people that no, but I was arts to start with. I'm coming back. I'm coming home. That was really tricky, and I had to find another way in. So what I did was I took the leap. I'd moved to Scotland at this point, so the law was not as appealing in terms of the training, and the salary it wasn't such a bind. I could get a job that paid the same as law, and all I did was look in the paper. I looked in the paper for jobs I might be able to do, and I applied for them all just to get out. And that was not particularly difficult for me, because I knew that I was in the wrong job, but it was incredibly difficult for the people I worked with, who did not possibly couldn't understand why I would want to leave. And I remember having a meeting with HR in the law firm saying, but why are you going? But why? Why would you want to leave law? Why would you do that? Nobody understood. Officially, nobody understood. But in my day-to-day life, getting a coffee or hanging around the office, people who I'd never met would come up to me and they would say secretly, "How are you doing this? How are you getting out?" As if I'd kind of found a way out of a prison, which to me just kind of reinforced that I was doing the right thing. Because the problem with jobs that are very prestigious and pay very well is that you get stuck in them, because your lifestyle requires that amount of money, requires that lifestyle, and you can't then go back. And I was determined to go back, and it was not easy. One of the questions I think that Harrison had forwarded to me was, what was the most difficult decision I've made in my career? And almost certainly, the most difficult for me was actually leaving London to move to Scotland, because I knew that this was taking me out of, as I say, a very sort of prestigious, safe environment with lots of people I knew and loved, into a completely different country. But the most difficult decision for everyone else to comprehend was the idea that I would leave the law and change into a completely different job. And for me, the law was a kind of, 4-year blip in my life. It was not the be all and end all. And for someone who, I had no experience of lawyers until I started being one. They didn't do law at York. I didn't know any people studying law. I'd never wanted to study law. It made total sense to me. And it was quite easy when it came to it. And it was not a straightforward transition to the arts. I had to go a kind of long way round. So the first job I got when I left was as a science communicator in a museum. And I loved that, because I got to chat to people all the time about the museum and about the exhibits. And I just loved meeting people, getting to know other people. And then I got approached to do a different job by someone I'd met at the museum. And I ended up retraining in business psychology. And this is obviously a whole other career on top of that. So I ended up in management consultancy. I studied business psychology. And it was always about getting to use the skills I'd learned in terms of the client interface and the advisory role. And the business psychology was way into that. And I ended up being in a job where I was brought in to companies when there were what they would call challenging individuals in the business. And I would be asked to work with them one-to-one, to either mediate or to persuade them maybe they might want to leave, or just persuade them to change their behavior. And you can see why that matches with law, maybe, the mediation side. But for me, this was all about my first degree, because everybody I met, every story I heard, the tales they told me, There was nothing new, because if you love books and you've read stories all your life, there is nothing that you haven't already heard. And I absolutely loved being able to hear what people were saying, be completely unfazed by it, and still in the back of my head, I was chalking it all up for a chapter in the novel that one day I was going to write, and it was great fun. But it gave me an insight into all these other businesses, and it especially gave me an insight into people who weren't happy in their work, as I hadn't been in the law. And it made me question, I'm still not back in the arts. I mean, this is all fine, but I'm still not back in the arts, and I need to try and get in there. And when you're starting out in your career, there are paths that you can try to get into a certain industry. So for most people, there are internships, there is work experience, there are courses you can do to prove your interest in a topic. And to be honest, when I was in my mid-30s with one child and another on the way, the idea of doing an internship in an arts organization just didn't seem plausible for me at all. And it was really difficult to think how on earth I would get back in. And I started initially by carrying on my day job, but I started writing, and I would write articles for magazines and get paid to do that just in my spare time. And I thought, this is me, I'm getting back in, I'm getting back towards a bit of my degree. But the theatre side of it had gone, and the festival side of it had gone. And one of the things I was asked before tonight is, has art always been your passion? And the easy answer to that is yes, but not art per se, not visual art as I would call it, but the arts, absolutely. I mean, if you were to put a gun to my head and say, what's life all about? It's always been the arts. It's always been the experiences I have at the theatre, reading a book, looking at a painting. It's so important to me as a method by which we can express and share what is human and what we have in common, and our reaction to things. And I think finally finding a career in which that is the main thrust of what I have to do has been the most satisfying thing. And almost it took me 20 years to get that right, because I think if you can do other things, sometimes you end up doing them. But there's usually, for everybody, one driving force that they really love that matters more than anything. And to me, the arts matters more than anything. And I was very lucky to find Sotheby's, because it was a combination of that plus all the business stuff I'd done. So it's a cross between the arts and a really high pressured sales environment. So not at all what my early experience of working in the arts and festivals and arts organizations, it is not like that. An auction house is a business like any other business. It's about the bottom line. But what makes it different is that you get to work with people who share your values, who share your view that this is the most important thing ever. And also you get to work with people who academically are at the absolute top of their field. I get to work with people who know more about Italian sculpture than anyone else in the UK. I get to work with people who know more about a single impressionist painter than anyone else in the UK. And so everything I do, I'm learning something new. But the idea that I could make a career out of that did not occur to me until quite late on. And even when it had occurred to me, I found it very difficult to get a job that would suit me and that I could actually do. It's very competitive. It's very difficult. And for those of you who are studying history of art and who have that background, I'm so jealous, because I would have loved to have studied history of art. And if you remember anything from this talk, please remember that I now run Sotheby's in Scotland, but for most of my school and university life, definitely, I wasn't aware that the history of art was even a subject. They didn't teach it at my school. I didn't know anybody who taught it. I went to quite an average comprehensive school. Nobody studied history of art. Nobody had heard of it. None of my friends had heard of it. At university, nobody had really heard of it. I think the first time I heard the history of art mentioned as a subject was when Prince William was in the paper because he'd gone off to study it somewhere. So I always say that to people in Sotheby's because I think more than anything, the obvious degree for the career you want is not always necessary at all. I had no idea the history of art existed, and I now work in an organization where most of my colleagues will have got incredible degrees in history of art. So there's really nothing in the way in that sense. It's the practical aspect of finding the role that suits you. And within the arts, especially the visual arts, the jobs are quite different. If you're a curator in a museum, you're going to have to be quite an academic person, and you're going to have to be very detail minded, and your subject is going to have to be incredibly finely honed. And in the auction world, that can also be the case, but a lot less so, because on the same time that you're dealing with precious and incredible objects, you're also running a business. You're trying to make money. You are selling to people. You are persuading people to sell. And those skills, I would say, were the ones that I brought with me from previous jobs. When it comes to the art and the objects itself, luckily for me, I get to learn an awful lot from my colleagues who have specialized in this for years. And the great thing about being somewhere like Scotland is that rather than being in a single department, so Sotheby's is split into categories. There's fine art, there's luxury, and if you work in fine art, you might work in, say, modern British art, or you might work in contemporary art or impressionist art. And the same with luxury. You might work with jewellery, you might work with watches, and these specialisms are very distinct. And although people generally have studied history of art, the real way they acquire their knowledge, and the knowledge that's very valuable for our clients, is they learn it by being in that job, by working in an auction house, by starting out usually down in a basement, cataloguing very dusty pictures, and not getting paid very much. And there is nothing quite like actually seeing the pictures and seeing the way they're put together, seeing the frame, even the back of the frame, looking at them properly under light, looking at them with different people. It's a big part of my job now to do that. And I've learned a lot about what I'm looking for. And even with that, I would never be on the same level as the people who have studied and been doing this for 20 years. So at my age, the people who are my peers will have been doing this job for 20 years, whereas I've come a very different route. And there's a lot I might change. One of the questions was, if I could go back in time, would I do everything the same? On a philosophical level, I'm just going to say no. But that's because philosophically, I don't think you should ever change anything, because it would change right now, and right now is always amazing. But looking at it practically, is there anything I would change? I think I would stick to my instinct more. I think there's a lot of information around you when you're making career choices and degree choices, and everybody's got an opinion, and there are established opinions that are not questioned. But as well as that, I think everybody has a kind of gut feeling of what they like and what they really enjoy. And in my case, I couldn't place how that fit in a job. And I think that happens for lots of people. They know what they really love to do, or they know what really brings them the most satisfaction work-wise, but they can't find a role that fits it. And one advantage I would say of being easily bored like I am, and changing career all the time, is that you do end up finding what you want, but you just might not get it straight away. And the only thing I would change is that I would have listened to my gut feeling as to what I wanted earlier on, and got myself into a job that I love much earlier on, because then I could enjoy it for a lot longer. The other thing you asked me was about my favorite artworks, which is one of those questions that I hate, because I thought I had favorite artworks until I started working for Sotheby's, and now my favorite artworks change depending on whatever's in the gallery, because there are just the most amazing works of art in the galleries that I get to walk past when I'm down in London. And I can completely change between loving contemporary installation and then being crazy about medieval sculpture. Medieval sculptures, the faces on them are just built for internet memes. I mean, they have the most incredible facial expressions. They're just hilarious. And it's very difficult to pick something that you love the best. I find it easier to pick things in the arts generally that I love the best. Books I find very easy to pick. The most recent picture I loved was a painting by David Hockney from the early 70s, and it is of a woman walking in the rain, which doesn't sound particularly interesting, but it has all those incredible colours that Hockney puts into things. And although you normally see them in California or in some amazing living room, seeing them in what should be a really boring, rainy scene, it's just the most beautiful picture. It's huge as well. And I have a special kind of collecting interest in pictures of people in the rain. So that ticked all my boxes, so to speak. Yeah, sadly it sold for about $7 million, so I wasn't able to buy it. I'd be interested to know whether people would be keen to hear more about the auction world now and how to start a career in it now, because I think what the auction world is looking for has changed. I can't talk too knowledgeably about other sectors in the arts at the moment, but I know what auction houses are looking for at the moment, and it has been a big change. And I personally would like to see a much broader selection of people entering auction houses. I think auction houses have been historically a place where people work when they have their own private income and when they have their own collection at home. And that is changing a lot. And I now find that a lot of the younger people I work with, who are maybe in their late 20s, let's say, who have been working for 5-6 years, they haven't always studied history of art. They've maybe studied history or they've studied politics, but they've loved art and they have devoted time to studying it as an aside from their degree. Maybe they've worked in a gallery. Maybe they have become a collector in some respect, or they're just very interested in exhibitions. They've read catalogues. There's one thing that we often find. So Sotheby's, as you can imagine, has an internship program. which is highly competitive, and I'm always slightly concerned by the amount of people on it who have the most amazing qualification in the history of art from a great university like Edinburgh, and but they don't know how to answer the phone. So, and that may sound really straightforward, but although it's the arts, and although everybody is there because they love the work, they love the objects, they love the paintings, you have to be able to demonstrate that you can communicate with anybody, to be honest, really successfully, because you could get the Duke of Buccleuch phoning you up, or you could get somebody who is just living on their own and really lonely and has a copy of Harry Potter that they bought in W.H. Smith and they think it's worth a fortune. So you've got to be able to straddle that divide in terms of clients. You need to be able to approach everybody in the same way. And what we tend to find when we're interviewing for interns, and you might have heard this, because I'm hoping this message kind of gets through to people quite a lot now, is that we'll bring in a piece of art, we'll bring in a painting from a sale that we've got coming up, and we'll show it to the person being interviewed and say, what do you think? Do you know who it's by? It doesn't matter whether you know who it's by. I mean, unless it's really obvious. But generally, it doesn't matter if you know who it's by. What matters is that you are interested in it, that you can talk about what you see in it. And most importantly, the one tip I would give you is hold the painting, ask if you can see it, pick it up, look at it more closely, turn it round. Don't just leave it sitting on a table. Actively engage with the art or the object, and have a look at what you think, what you can tell people about it. Think about how you would be selling that to a collector. And think about the context in which you could offer it for a sale. Sales now are highly curated, they're often themed, and the specialists have to be incredibly good communicators. There's much more emphasis on performance now and digital terms. So if you're putting together a sale, you'll quite often be asked to do a presentation over Instagram or on IGTV, something like that. You'll be asked to maybe interview somebody. You'll need to really love and know your subject, because you can't pre-script those types of presentations. They're not scripted and they go out live. So you need to really love and know your subject. But at the same time, being able to communicate in that way is actually a huge advantage nowadays. There's a lot less poring over books, and a lot more outward facing, communicating and showing and demonstrating your knowledge and your passion for the subject. I am just going to click down because I noticed a chat thing. So Caroline Robinson, there's a looming idea that the world of the arts is very nepotistic. Yes. Do you think this is a leftover ideal from the days when art and collecting was a family affair? Or is this changing now with severe changes to the traditional nuclear family, especially considering, yes, I really, really hope that this is the case. So, oops, I pressed the wrong button. My real difficulty with auction houses when I first encountered them, which was through a friend, actually, ironically, who worked in the legal department for Sotheby's. She worked there for 12 years. And she kept saying to me, this is the perfect job for you. You would love to work at Sotheby's. Come and work for Sotheby's. But it was never the right role. But my impression from her, and when I started, was that historically, nepotism was a huge part of working in an auction house and in the arts generally, because if you knew people who might buy or own important works of art, they would employ you. And I personally, being from the kind of background where, that I was so far away from that, it was unbelievable. I found that really hard to deal with. And I found it very frustrating that there was an expectation that I would have experienced a certain amount of what I would call sort of upper middle class lifestyle. That was very prevalent, I'd say, up until about 5 years ago, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's still there in places. What there is now is a real drive for that not to happen, because I think auction houses have recognised where they're lacking in diversity and where they are certainly low on inclusion, and everything is about trying to get more voices into the art world, and this is evidenced even by the sales. So if you think nowadays, we've just had our first hip hop auction. We've got an auction of trainers going live at the moment in New York, called The Art of Canvas, which is all these amazing artist designed trainers. We've sold skateboards now. I think there's a seismic change going on. I hate the word seismic. Don't use it lightly, but there really is an enormous change going on, because auction houses are becoming luxury marketplaces like any other, like Louis Vuitton, like the great designers. The auction house can offer for sale a huge variety of things, and you're not going to get that just because somebody has been in a family where they collect and they're used to having precious objects around the house. That is going to be useful for parts of the job, in certain departments, definitely. But there's a possibility now to just get a lot of new voices and new experiences and new ideas in, and auction houses are looking for that. They're positively looking for it. I am part of a group whereby we're trying to see how we can encourage more people to think of it as a career. And certainly last year, we didn't do internships this year because of COVID, but last year there was a really great cohort of interns who were not necessarily from an art history background, who were not necessarily used to the idea of collecting, who hadn't grown up with it at all. And it's, for me, the most important thing if the business is going to keep going and actually represent the arts properly. There's another question here. Oh yes, the preservation of art in the national interest versus selling it to preserve museums themselves. I know this is a very tricky question. I am always on the side of preserving the art. I can't get away from it. I know museums need money. I get it. We sell to museums quite a lot. We broker deals with them. Quite often we'll do a joint thing. So you'll probably, if you're in Edinburgh, you'll have seen the Three Graces. The Duke of Bedford sold those to the National Gallery of Scotland. And it was sold jointly to the V&A and the National Galleries because one museum alone couldn't afford it. If they said they were going to sell those just to stay alive, no, I'm not. I find it really hard. There's always another way to get cash, is my view. It's the same with the banks. There's always another way. What job position did you start off with? Yeah, a very good question. I started off as a temporary contract, part-time administrative assistant. And it was an enormous pay cut for me. It was way below my level of education and experience. And I did it because it was the only way in, and I wanted it, and I got it. And having got in there, I was then able to demonstrate that I could do an awful lot more, which is how it's continued on. What's next? In Germany, provenance is a huge issue. Yeah, I do see potential for that startup. Sorry, people might not be able to see this. I'm just going to read it out. Do you think there will be new digital technologies for provenance, or would you see some potential for a startup? Go for it. There is potential always for a startup, and especially in something like this, because the auction world has been fairly slow to tilt into online and digital. Sotheby's has accelerated that massively in the last year. but only because we've had a new owner who's invested in that heavily. There are lots of arts organizations that really, I think, will look to and need digital assistance. And I love that idea of the Provenance, definitely. How has COVID-19 changed auction sales? Uh, Hugely. So when we went into lockdown in March, the sale calendar was quite set, and you would have some London, what we would call everyday sales in January and February. And when I say an everyday sale, I mean it's not going to have an enormous, hugely high value piece of work in it. It's going to be a sale that in its total will probably make something like £2 to £3 million. So for us, that's an everyday sale. The key kind of pegs of the year by which everything else is hung are the spring and the autumn sales, and they happen for Sotheby's both in London, Hong Kong, and New York. And these are the multi-billion-dollar sales on which the whole business did rest. So as you can imagine, lockdown in all of Europe and then New York, March. April was when we were going to make billions of dollars. We can't make billions of dollars. So immediately there's a hole. So the pivot, if you like, for the auction business was, instead of hanging everything on these hugely high profile evening marquee sales, we had to switch to putting a lot of sales out very quickly, all online, with property that people didn't need to come and see in person because they weren't allowed in the building. We did 500%. We got 500% more revenue in the 6 weeks of lockdown from online sales than we did the previous year. So we very, very quickly adapted and changed. And at the moment, it looks like those changes are permanent. So although the big pegs of the year, the big autumn and spring sales series, they're continuing, they're not in the same format as they were. There are exhibitions now physically, which is great. But the sales are done remotely, they're done online, they're live streamed, and they are surrounded by, every day there is a sale online, every day, at least one. And these sales are constant. And I joke and I say it's posh eBay. It's not really a joke, kind of is posh eBay. These are very valuable, beautiful artworks or books or jewellery, and we're selling them daily online with a click on your phone. And that's been a huge difference. What have we got? I'm looking at the questions again. I'm just aware of your time, because I know we've got to finish in a second. So I've got a question about the application process for Sotheby's internships, and also specifically looking for an interviews in terms of backgrounds and experience. So and that's Fiona saying an art history undergrad and artist. I mean, perfect. So you're there. I think if you're doing art history, you're not going to have to prove that you're interested in the subject. Whereas they're looking for people from more diverse backgrounds to complement that. So there will still be a core intake of people with art history. So I don't think that's something you would need to worry about. The application process is all online. It's quite transparent. I would encourage anyone who's applying to phone up the HR team and ask them about it. And also, if you really do have a specialist area that you love, if you love 19th century European painting, look up on the Sotheby's website, 19th century European painting, find a specialist and phone them up and ask them all about their department. They would love to talk to you. They're all lovely people, and it's just a great way of finding out a bit about the department before you even apply. And I think don't ever be worried about doing that. Just look someone up and give them a ring, or drop them an email and ask if you can ring them. It's a very friendly business, and people know it's tough and they want to help because they know how much it means to get a role. Starting as an admin assistant, how did you move up to head? It took me about 2 years. And basically I saw lots of things that could be done better. I got on with them. Nobody gave me permission. I just did it. and I got rewarded for that, which is great. English literature student struggling to find a clear direction or path to follow to a sales-based career. Yes. The degree skills, did they help me? No. In a nutshell, apart from the fact that I think English lit reading helps you know about people, because Dickens has basically covered every client you're ever going to meet. But what did help me is that throughout my university, I worked in a series of roles in cafes, in retail, and that is the most helpful thing, or was the most helpful thing for me in getting into a sales background. I worked in the Gap. I was an assistant manager while I was studying law, and I ran a cafe bar. I did all sorts of things like that around my studies, and it helped me pay my rent, and it was incredibly useful for just getting to know more about the sales side of things. An additional business degree next to history of art. That depends what you want to go into. So there are roles in the auction world, business manager type roles, whereby they would love you to have done some kind of business qualification, or at least shown an interest in. It's more about having that mindset, I think, if you want to go into that business side of the auction world, because it is slightly separate from the specialists. So if you want to kind of hone your skills as a specialist, then I don't think the business side of it is necessary. But if you are interested in the business, the financial, the consignment decisions, the structure, the strategy, then absolutely, I would say do that, because it might help you make up your mind. So when you first started at Sotheby's, you spoke of showing your skills. How did you find an opportunity to do that? Oh, yes. Okay. So when I started, I was recruited to do this temporary role. And after I was recruited, I went round. I asked the senior manager that I reported into, I said, right, so who are all the people that matter to Scotland in Sotheby's generally? And I went round and met them all. So I went down to London, spent a few days in London, met everybody who mattered. And I asked them what they needed from Scotland and what was missing and how it could be better. And there was a regular meeting, kind of 3 times a year, all about Scotland, the Scotland Task Force, it was called. It's like a strategy meeting, very important people at it, who I was slightly terrified of. But having spoken to everyone, I had an idea of what needed to be done, and I wrote a 5-point plan just on my computer, on my kitchen table at home, of what I thought needed to be done. And I took it to that meeting, and I gave a copy of it to everybody, and I said, this is what I think needs to be done. And everyone was completely silent. And I thought, oh, shit, I've really overstepped myself here. It's not my role to be doing this. Oh, God, they all hate me. And I went back to my desk, and then I got an email, several emails from lots of them saying, this is the best document ever. That was one of the best meetings we've been at, because no one was doing that. So I think you've got to go with what you think is right. And for me, I think a lot of that came with experience and age, I guess, the confidence. But there's no reason at any stage why, if you have a really good idea, please tell everybody, tell as many people as you can. They are wanting to hear it. Everybody is stuck. Everybody wants things to be better. And if you have a way to do that, let everybody know about it. Tell them how you're going to do it. Give them a chance to think about it. I think that is all the questions. And I'm, oh my God, 10 minutes over time. I talk way too much. It's been really interesting to get your questions. My email is on the website. If you have any further questions, do just drop me an email. I'd be happy to help out. Let me know if you've got any questions at all. I might not be able to answer straight away, but I will definitely at some point sit down and answer anything you want to ask, because I know it's a tough career to think about getting into. And I think as many of us that can be helpful about that, the better.
Thank you so much, Lucy. It was very lovely having you today. Thank you everyone for
That was
joining us.
really, really interesting. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Oh, gone dark.
Lots of thank yous.
Well, I'll end it there. Once again, thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you for both societies sort of coming together to join us for this event. I really enjoyed it. Cool. Have a good
Thanks, Alison. Okay, bye, Zahraa. Bye.
Bye.